as a result of this absolutely vile and ruthless attack by the United States against the Venezuelan state, against Nicolas Maduro, the elected president, who has been practically kidnapped live and in real time. And now he is being displayed as if he were a war trophy. A lot of people suddenly look to the Russian Federation, not only asking themselves, and what about Russia and China? Which, in fact, we have already answered very clearly on this very channel, but also by comparing the special military operation of the Russian Federation with this latest star military operation carried out by the United States. Well, of course, I have a lot to say in response to each and every one of these commenters. So now let's look at the comparative conclusion of the two exact operations. Let's see where it could improve and whether it could or not. Vladimir Putin, what has Donald Trump done wrong and why? Should these questions be compared? Because I'll tell you in advance, comparisons are odious, but above all, they leave one side at a disadvantage. And in this case, it's not exactly the Russian Federation's side. Let's begin. By comparing the case of Russia and the United States. And well, this very common question, what should Vladimir Putin change? How is it possible that the leader of the Russian Federation has already been conducting a special military operation for 4 years and hasn't achieved absolutely anything? Especially judging by the comments of the most ardent NATO supporters. Meanwhile, Donald Trump, as soon as he arrived, suddenly it was almost like he came and immediately achieved absolutely everything. And here, the first question I must ask, I think quite fairly, is what the hell exactly is Donald Trump supposed to have achieved? I mean, when we're talking about the Venezuelan case, we're supposed to limit ourselves to an absolutely glorious military operation to extract Nicolas Maduro, which involved I don't know how many Chinese helicopters, which absolutely no one from the Venezuelan government even made the slightest attempt to shoot down, which in itself already raises more than one question. But above all, besides all the staging, which honestly is really great, just like a Hollywood movie, few operations have been more spectacular, although don't leave just yet, because an even more spectacular operation carried out by the Russian Federation has indeed been seen. And I'm going to tell you exactly which one it is, but before that, putting aside how spectacular it really is, let's get to it. The reason, has the operation been carried out by the United States? Yes, even acts of terrorism and piracy end up being turned into the best movies, which always have, of course, American winners. Donald Trump is already talking about how they have deployed around 160 planes. Since the army was there on the ground, there were a lot of soldiers, not a single casualty. I mean, I repeat, absolutely like a movie. Events that seem pretty unbelievable. I don't know why that is. But getting to the heart of the matter, where they arrest Maduro, detain him, kidnap him, drag him out of the country, then drive him around the United States in a car. What the hell have they actually achieved? Besides that, because supposedly one of the objectives was, they say, to support the issue of democracy, and the other, now they're saying it clearly. At least thank you very much for not lying to us ordinary people. They're there for the oil that the United States doesn't even need, but they want their enemies not to have it. And here they specifically mention Russia, China, Iran, and Hezbollah. We'll have to see if they achieve this goal or not, because Delcy Rodriguez, who has taken office for now, says she's going to cooperate, but we'll have to see to what extent. Because I still remind you, the United States Congress has to speak, both the House and the Senate. Also, now he feels absolutely betrayed. I mean, at a certain point, just about 2 weeks ago, I think. Marco Rubio assured the United States Congress that under no circumstances would they enter Venezuela. They would not intervene in the country or carry out any kind of military operation. And as soon as Congress was in recess, I mean, they were enjoying their well-deserved holidays on festive days. They, being very clever, went ahead and carried out the intervention they promised they would never do. Now, just as Congress returns. Let me remind you that one of the last votes was decided by just 2 votes in favor of Donald Trump. And in fact, it had quite a lot to do, precisely, with military interventions in third countries. J.D. Vance, who is the Vice President of the United States, is against intervening in any country, including Venezuelan territory. That's why precisely Marco Rubio has been the one who has taken charge of the case. But all of this raises the million-dollar question: what the hell exactly has Donald Trump achieved right now? Besides the movie with the Chinook helicopters, which haven't been shot down by magic, and most likely because of the existence of some agreement behind the scenes. And in addition, Maduro as a political figure of questionable usefulness at this moment. Wait, they might even have to ask the Russian Federation to do him the favor of letting him enjoy what's left of his retirement, along with moving to La Assad in Moscow, enjoying the views of a city that is, by all accounts, absolutely beautiful. So the practical results are limited to the fact that while trying to remove the Chavista regime, they ended up keeping the same Chavista regime. In fact, this greatly surprised the entire Venezuelan opposition, who were already there and who were taking their seat. And in the end, it turned out that the seat was taken away from them. At the last minute, the race hadn't started, and Edmundo Gonzalez and Maria Corina Machado were already falling, practically digging a hole with their own noses in front of Donald Trump's feet, to whom Maria Corina Machado herself practically already. Not only did she lick his balls, but on top of that, she even wanted to give him her Nobel Peace Prize. I think she would even give up her underwear and whatever else was needed just to keep the leadership of Venezuela. But we can see that won't happen. That is, if we have to compare the case of the Russian Federation and the case of Venezuela in terms of preliminary results, yes. Exactly. It is taking Russia much longer to advance in Ukrainian territory than it took the United States to achieve its objective in Venezuelan territory. But no. But on the part of the Russian Federation, the steps are infinitely more solid. That is, while Russia is indeed achieving results in the form of tangible, controllable territory that has natural resources, which can provide significant economic, political, and military returns, also securing the deployment base for future operations. United States. The only thing it has at this point is Maria Corina, with promises to bet on peace and cooperate. It is still unknown under what terms or in what circumstances. And Nicolas Maduro, visibly unconcerned about the situation and absolutely worn out as a political asset. That is to say, it's good for a few moments of media glory, but certainly, I think, for very little else. But the most curious thing about this case is the fact that we will discuss, I repeat, at the end, that the comparison between the special military operation as a whole and what the United States has done in Venezuela wouldn't even be the most accurate. And of course, we are going to talk about the example that should actually be used and about the two sides that would be comparable to each other. And in the meantime, it's also important to talk about how difficult the decision to carry out these operations has been for one side and for the other. And the thing is, while for the United States, clearly, judging by the consequences and judging by the whole staging, it has been a very easy and simple decision. Because beforehand, it seems, because I repeat, I believe, because indeed, this is a carefully organized and orchestrated plan. From the very first moment, they knew and were almost 100% sure that this intervention would be successful. And if things went wrong, well, at worst, they would just end up with a couple of bad headlines, but not much more than that. Whereas for Vladimir Putin, clearly, this has been the most complex and difficult decision of his life. Not for nothing. Since 2014, he was there watching to see if Ukraine would end up complying with the Minsk agreements, if, in the end, things would be resolved and Russia wouldn't have to intervene. And in 2022, many years later, when it became absolutely inevitable and intervention was necessary no matter what, Vladimir Putin had to face the extremely difficult decision of mobilizing his own population, of confronting his people, because even though they are not confronting civilians in any case, but rather coming to protect them, collateral damage is still there. These people undoubtedly go through it no matter what, in the worst possible way, having to leave their homes, having to abandon their loved ones, having to go through tremendous stress, which is necessarily what war brings. They are a brotherly people. Whereas for the United States, Venezuela has nothing to do with that, and in fact, is seen from a position of absolute superiority. The comparison, therefore, I think, wouldn't be the right one, but if you'll allow me the detail. And here, I think, is where we reach the most interesting point of this video, this reflection in the form of a video. If we had to compare a Russian operation and a United States operation in terms of the latter, supposedly, Gloria, I'm going to say media-driven, much more media-driven than military on the part of the United States. In Venezuela, we shouldn't take the case of the entire special military operation, but rather the case of Crimea. That was the blitzkrieg of the Russian Federation, where there was in total the absolutely incredible number of just one victim. I don't know under what circumstances it happened, but there was only one fatality from both sides. That is, not a single shot was fired, neither by the Russian Federation nor by Ukraine. In the vast majority of the Crimean Peninsula, while the operation was being carried out, there were some reactions that, indeed, as we can see from that single victim, showed minimal resistance. Not only that, the Russian Federation not only arrived in the territory of Crimea, not only took control of the territory of Crimea, it liberated Crimea. As they say in Russia itself, it allowed all those who did not want to be part of the Russian Federation to leave in an absolutely free way. There was no repression at all. People left. Yes, unfortunately, their homes, but many had relatives in the rest of Ukraine and ended up reuniting with them. Russia also offered Ukrainian soldiers the possibility to join the army of the Federation, and the vast majority of them accepted. Because in Crimea, the vast majority of the population truly feels Russian, and they were delighted with what was happening in that very turbulent 2014. On one hand, Russia was trying to reach a peace agreement for the territories of Donbass, without going in there, without claiming those territories or anything like that, simply so that the civilian population could live in peace. On the other hand, it was entering Crimea, and that was a very fast operation. A very successful surgical operation, where he showed the world how operations of this scale can be carried out. Not even close compared to the supposedly ultra-glorious American operation. Because what did they get, Maduro? And those results, which are still yet to be seen, what will they end up being? Meanwhile, Russia has territory. It has a very loyal civilian population. It also has a large part of the Ukrainian army that was in the region and now swells the ranks of the Russian Federation's army. Maxim has managed to withstand all of that in the long run, all the sanctions. And now, practically the whole world, including the collective West, is taking for granted that Crimea is territory of the Russian Federation, even if they don't want to officially recognize it yet. Still, the United States has even proposed to sign it with Ukraine definitively. Because it is taken for granted, I repeat, that Crimea is literally not going anywhere from Russia. That really was quite an operation. The United States had casualties. On the other side, the Russian Federation had only one casualty in total. And not only that, they didn't just arrive and liberate the territory, but they also held a referendum there, where the population could vote for or against the annexation of Crimea to Russian territory, about Crimea's return home, and the vast majority of the population already expressed themselves in absolutely open terms. It was obvious what they would end up deciding, because if Russia hadn't known what the result of the referendum would be, this operation would never have been carried out. And in fact, the reaction from the military who were there, as well as from the civilian population, confirmed this once again. Exactly this, that Russia was expected in Crimea. So next time they try to sell you a comparison between Russia and the United States regarding what's happening now, or in Venezuela, well, now you have plenty of arguments to stand up to them. Yes, in some cases it might seem that Russia is losing a lot to the United States in Ukrainian territory, having to face all of NATO and not like the United States, A Venezuelan government that was probably generously paid off with large amounts of money? I mean, well, I don't have proof, but I don't have any doubts either. Meanwhile, the Russian Federation, I repeat, is still advancing on the battlefield despite facing all of NATO. But actually, the most accurate comparison wouldn't be that one, but rather the one with the Crimean Peninsula, which is like this. It was a stellar operation that the United States would love to be able to carry out, for example, in a hypothetical Greenland.